Here's the agenda for today. It's very brief. We're just going to give you a brief overview of what we've been up to here at the competition at XPRIZE, and then we'll run through the rules and regulations updates, of course. Then we'll do a deep dive into the scoring and testing criteria. So that's probably what everyone's mostly interested in. And then we'll open it up to Q&A from you all. So hopefully you came with some good questions for us about the rules and regulations, the updates, the timeline, like anything at all you want to talk about. This is your time. So we should have hopefully around 30 minutes of Q&A time at the end here. We ask that you hold your questions until that time, but feel free to drop questions in the chat along the way. We also ask that you use the Slack channel. Everyone should have access to that too. So I have another slide on that here. Let's see. Right, so you all know the rules, but really quickly, just please keep your audio muted while we're presenting, because there's a lot of people on the call, of course. If you're up for it and you're feeling like you're ready for the day, turn your camera on. We'd love to see your shining faces. That'd be awesome, but no pressure. Like I said, the Slack channel, maybe if Caroline or MJ or Cameron can drop the link in the chat, that'd be great. We use this during the team summit, of course, so we want to keep this active for you. If you have any questions, drop them in there, and that can be like preserved for even after the webinar too. And then lastly, let me make sure I'm recording this, actually. Good thing I wrote that. So we want to record this webinar. Oh no, it is recording, sorry. It's early, guys. So we're going to record this for you. We'll send you the recording afterwards, and anyone that can't make it today because of time zone issues, we'll send it to them. So we'll send you the slide deck too. Let's move along here. So first, competition updates. So what have we been up to here at XPRIZE? Well, one big thing we've been working on is late registration. So as you know, after you all were selected as semifinalists in the summer, we've been open for late registration. And we've had quite a bit of interest from teams. Surprisingly, over 80 teams from 20 plus different countries have expressed interest in applying. I think we're a little bit surprised by how many teams that showed interest. So that's great to see how many people are working on these issues. We don't expect all of them to apply, of course, so there'll be a fraction, but that's kind of where we're at now, and it's very exciting. So we pushed the deadline out. This was in my email to you all, but just as a refresher, we pushed the late registration deadline out by a couple weeks to give these teams more time to apply. So now the new deadline is December 15th. That's next week. So it's coming up soon, but they will go through the same process that everyone here did. They're submitting a technical submission. They paid a late fee, and then they had to sign the competitor agreement. The judging panel will take their submissions and review them just like they reviewed yours, and they'll make their final decision in January next month, and then we'll have a public announcement. So stay tuned. This is coming soon. Hopefully you'll have some new teams in the running very soon. Another thing we've been up to is just attending a lot of different industry events. Of course, most of them have been virtual, and we've seen a lot of you at them. But we did get to attend one event in person, which was great. And that's this photo here. This was at the Cultured Meat Symposium in San Francisco, and we attended that in October, I believe. And we were invited by that group to host a fireside chat with Novel Farms. And so that's, you see Nieves up there on stage with the mic, talking with Caroline, of course. And they just had a great chat about the competition, about Novel Farms, and kind of what they're working on and how their tech works and so forth. So that was a lot of fun. We also got to see some other competitors and teams at the event. So here's Noreen from Blue Nalu, of course, talking about the sustainability of cell-based meat with the panel. Who else was there? Mr. Paul Shapiro was up there. This is with the event organizers, Anita and Alex, and they recorded a live webinar, I believe, which was really cool. So got to see Paul. Ben from Wild Type was there, and he presented on them, of course, and surprised everyone with a live taste testing of salmon. I unfortunately was not a lucky person that got selected to taste it, but I heard it was delicious. So that was really cool. And then Dan Blustein Redstove, who's one of our judges, was there also, and he gave a presentation on his work at the Breakthrough Institute, which was great. And then we don't have photos of them up here, but we also get to see Vitor from Good Meat, and then Run from Celex. So they stopped by our booth. That was a lot of fun. We got to catch up with them, and it was great. So we hope to attend more in-person events over the next year. Of course, with COVID going on, we never know what will happen, but we hope to attend different events, not just for cell-based, for plant-based and fermentation tech, of course, too, and around different cities around the world. So we'll be sure to invite you all, like if you're in the region, hopefully you can attend and we can hang out. So that's what we've been up to there. And then also, very excited to announce we have onboarded a new team member, Dr. Cameron Semper, who is serving as our cell-based protein expert. And rather than butcher his very impressive background in CV, I'd like to introduce Cameron and call him up to the virtual stage to introduce himself and tell us about his background. So Cameron, if you're ready, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure, thanks, Jordan. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Yeah, my name's Cameron. I'm excited to be part of the XPRIZE team and contribute to development of the competition, and even more excited to see the solution development by all the semifinalist teams. In addition to helping out with XPRIZE, I also am an active researcher in the field. So I work on growth medium development for fish cell culture and growth factor production using microbial systems. Also research a bunch of other stuff as well, but that's less relevant towards the field of cellular agriculture. So excited to get in touch with you all, and happy to be here.
Great, thanks, Cameron. All right, I'm gonna hopefully not share my Spotify playlist again, but so I'll go through some of the high-level updates now for the rules and regs. So first off, you might be wondering, why did we update the rules and regulations? And it's an awesome question. So just to address that up front, we do this for you. This is for the benefit of you, the teams, to plan for the next year of the competition, of course, and then specifically the semifinalist testing event. So that's where most of the updates were, and we'll dive into those momentarily. But you can count on us updating the rules and regulations ahead of each testing round. So the next one will be the finalist round, of course, and we will update the rules and regulations at that time too, to include more details on how testing will work at that point, and then the bonus prize, of course. So it's really, in short, for the benefit of you and your planning purposes. So what got updated this time? So there were some major updates and then some minor updates. We'll start at the top. The major updates, there were really three big ones. The competition timeline was one of them. So we pushed everything out by about 1 calendar quarter, or about 3 months. So we did that to kind of provide more time for the testing and different analyses, and then also to ensure that there's just enough time for all the different activities that will take place next year. So the timeline got pushed out by a small amount, by about 3 months. The semifinalist round section, that's the bulk of the update. So this is where we added a lot of information on the criteria that we'll go through shortly, the product spec sheets, the semifinalist verification, which is kind of the next gateway you'll pass through in the competition, and then the semifinal submission. So we'll unpack all these very shortly again, but the last big update was the finals round, and same sort of idea. We tried to add as much more detail as we have right now at this moment on the the finals round, and what testing will look like at that point, as well as the bonus criteria. So those are the major updates. The minor updates, there were some, revisions like for grammatical and syntactical things, maybe some spelling or rewordings throughout the document. So we encourage you all to read the entire document and let us know if you have any questions whatsoever on any section, but really nothing fundamental should have changed in those minor updates. Here's the competition timeline. You should all be familiar with this, of course, but we just wanted to show this to you to visualize kind of what got pushed out. So any dates in purple or fuchsia color are what got adjusted. So starting in the bottom left here, the late registration deadline, again, that is now December 15th. Skipping ahead to, let's see, the semifinalist testing and judging summit. So before, I think this was like in Q2 or 3 of 2022. So now we have some specificity on when this will take. Q3. Thanks, Caroline. So Q3, now we have specificity on when this will take place. So it will take place in October 2022, most likely late October or very early November, maybe like the first week. So we're going to announce the specific dates very, very soon, but it will take place around that time. Finalist selection and announcement will take place right after. That will be in November of 2022, so you can count on that. And then lastly, the finals, testing and judging summit and winner selection, those got pushed out by 1 quarter. So now they are both going to be held in Q2 of 2024. So again, we'll send you the slide deck afterwards, so you'll have this. You don't have to take screenshots, but feel free if you want to. But that's kind of what got pushed out timeline-wise. So now I'd like to hand it up to Caroline to run us through a few other updates from the rules and regulations, and I will stop talking now. So Caroline.
Thanks, Jordan. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is take you through what happens between now and testing. So kind of the runway, what we expect over the next few months leading up to the October-November testing milestone. So first, in the rules and regs, we unpacked each of those criteria, and later on, MJ and Cameron will take you through each one in more detail. But in the semifinals, we will be testing you on these things which we had, we've known from the beginning. So just to go over them again, we will do some structure and physical characteristics testing. We'll test the nutritional profile of your chicken and fish alternatives. We will look at the environmental footprint and economic evaluation of those products. We look at food safety to make sure everything is safe for consumption for the judging panel. And then we're testing on size, the preparation and cookability, and the sensory profile. So those are all the criteria that will be tested in the semifinals and again in the finals. In order to test all of this, we want to compare your amazing products to an animal origin reference. So the judging panel will be evaluating all of the criteria that I just mentioned in relation to this conventional, traditional product that we are all familiar with. XPRIZE will be in charge of providing all the animal origin references for testing. So imagine when you're sending your product to the labs will also have the animal origin reference from us to be compared to. We will work very hard to also send you some of these animal origin references along, along the way, so you can be familiar with that product that we will use. And then in Q1, 2022, early next year, we're trying to work really hard to release a product specification sheet. So other than a physical animal origin reference that we'll hopefully send to you so you know what we're comparing to, we will send very specific fish and chicken specification sheets for the animal origin references. Those spec sheets will include the nutritional profile information. So as you know, we're looking at 10% deviation from the nutritional profile. So we'll include some upper and lower limits there, as well as appearance for the products. At this stage, as you saw in the rules and regulations, we're really looking at chicken, and on the fish side, we're looking at 2 spec sheets, oily fish and white fish. If we feel like there's one team or 2 teams doing a very specific species of fish that requires its own spec sheet, we will work to do that and publish one. Cool. So once you have the specification sheet, there will be a month or 2 before we do the semifinalist verification round. The semifinalist verification is usually a simple check on where you are in the process to make sure that you are prepared to go to testing in a few months. We do these verifications on every competition. Sometimes they include teams sending us some paper submissions showing us where they are. They sometimes include a video submission. And in other prizes, we've also done site visits so we can go and visit the teams and see where they are. This will take place in March 22. What we're looking at for Feed the Next Billion is 3 items in the semifinalist verification submission. One is a food safety declaration form that all the teams will complete and send to us by the end of March. All teams will submit this, and it asks questions about your ingredients, your processes, and to make sure everything is safe ahead of testing. The second thing we will ask is a video submission. We will send detailed instructions and potentially an example video that you can follow. And we want to see a product in action being cut into something like that, something preliminary, to make sure everyone is on track to submit the material prototypes in the testing, in the semifinals testing. And then the last ask that we have during the semifinalist verification is for you to confirm your final selection of your fish species. So we kind of left it open for now. Some teams are experimenting with more than one, but in March next year is when we hope that you lock that in, so we know exactly what we're testing a few months after that. One other detail note on the insurance requirements. This is also when we will require all the teams. Some of you have already submitted insurance certificates, but this is kind of the deadline for everyone to complete their verification, their insurance by the verification. So that takes us to March. After March, you'll be working on your solution still, and the next couple of slides talk about what constitutes your actual submission for semifinals testing. There are two main components. So other than the verification, we're looking for the physical prototype, that's component one. And the second component is a paper submission. And the paper submission mostly looks at the economic and environmental footprint or evaluations. So a little bit more on component one, which is the physical prototype that we will test for different criteria. The products you sent to us will either have to be cooked or uncooked. Sometimes you will cook them yourselves for specific criteria. Other times you will send them uncooked, and a participating lab partner will cook those products to perform testing. And this physical prototype will test at two different stages. One, submission one, this is the second bullet point on this slide, will be in July 2022. So by the end of July, we expect all of the teams to submit their semifinalist prototypes to the testing partners. These are labs that we will work with on the XPRIZE side to run the testing. So by July, you will send your prototypes and we will conduct two tests, the structure and physical characteristics test and the nutritional profile test. We expect the testing partner to conduct their test during August and then submit us their results in September so we can prepare them for the judging panel. The second prototype submission will happen in October. That's where we do the on-site, in-person, hopefully, fingers crossed, semifinals testing. And this is where we will evaluate some other criteria. So specifically food safety, this will happen on site just right before the judges taste your products. We will also be testing preparation and cookability, sensory profile, and size. So when you look at those two, it kind of makes sense. First, we'd go with the lab testing, get these results back, and then we're on site together testing the other criteria that require you to be with us preparing your product and us to test these things. So that's that. And I see the chat is exploding with questions, which is good. The second component is the technical submission. So this is a paper submission, quite similar to the one you submitted to apply for the competition. So it will be on a form, a few questions on there. There will be attachments that you will upload so for the judges to review. And it will mainly focus on the environmental footprint and economic evaluation criteria. It might include other questions around safety or nutritional profile or things like that, but you will receive all this in due time. So we will release the technical submission to all of you in June of next year, and you will have all of June, July, and August to complete that submission. So hopefully 3 months is enough time for you to look at the questions, reach out to us with any feedback or questions you may have, and complete the submission in time by August 2022. All right, this is the exciting part. All of it is exciting, but we're very excited to share this with you. We finally have a location for on-site testing in October, November. And what we want to do next, you kind of see some letters pop up on screen. These letters should spell out a city in the world. And we'd love for you to kind of start typing in what you think the city is, so we make it all exciting for everyone. So we're going to go through a few slides to see some letters pop up. Okay, we're seeing Beverly Hills, Abu Dhabi, okay. I think Shubhankar nailed it. So we're very excited to announce to all of you that the testing in person will be happening in Abu Dhabi next year in October, November. Around April or May next year, we will be sharing a lot more detail about the location, how to get there, how to get in, how to ship your products over there. So we will prepare a full operations guide by April, May next year to detail all of these specific details about the location and the logistics. But for now, we are just very excited to share well ahead of time that this is the location of our testing for the semifinals. So, all right. And with that, I hope I'm good on time. I didn't take too much time. I'll hand it over to MJ and Cameron, and they'll walk you through each of these criteria that I touched on lightly in depth. Thank you. Cameron's up first.
Yeah. Hi. All right. So hi, everyone. So yeah, this is one of the first criteria that we'll be testing. So this will be tested using a third-party lab testing partner. So we're currently in the process of exploring and identifying which testing partner we will use. But the idea is there will be a central testing partner. They may have multiple locations globally so that the logistics of sending samples there can be made as easy as possible. But the idea is that all teams will submit sample for testing to a lab or labs operated by a single testing partner. So the objective of this criteria is to obtain information that allows for comparison of structure and physical characteristics of your prototypes to the animal origin reference that you're trying to mimic. So the input here is, as it currently stands, one structured cutlet. So this is one piece, 1.5 to 2 ounces in size. And we will work well through the process of identifying a testing partner to reduce the size requirement. So the methodology that we'll be employing here, so we'll be doing a colorimetric analysis, which is a non-destructive test. We'll be doing texture profile analysis and testing the water holding capacity of your samples. In the case of the texture profile, actually in the case of all of these methodologies, we'll be testing them on uncooked samples as well as cooked samples. So the idea here is that you will ship your sample to the testing partner in an uncooked state, and accompanying that, you will provide them with instructions on how to prepare your sample. We recommend that the preparation instructions should adhere to those outlined in the preparation and cookability criteria, which we will discuss a little bit later. So it's a very simple method of preparation. And from that testing, we will get information on the color of your samples in an uncooked and cooked state. We'll get the standard outputs of texture profile analysis, and we'll get information on the water holding capacity of your samples. So obviously we're not digging into the microstructure of your samples at this time. You know, we are sensitive to you know, the complexity of those types of tests, as well as the material requirements and the turnaround time for those sorts of things. We may look into some of those things for the finals. So in the semifinal stage, we're looking at these, which are influenced by the structure of your sample, and should give us an indication in terms of how the structure compares between your prototypes and, again, the sample that you are trying to mimic. So the idea here is that in parallel, while you are submitting your samples, the testing partner will also be conducting these same tests on the same instruments, calibrated the same way on the animal origin samples. So if you're a fish team and you're, let's say, trying to produce I don't know, pollock, for example, then the testing partner will use a pollock sample, like an animal pollock sample, and test it using these same methodologies outlined here, and you'll be compared to a pollock sample. So we will try to match species to species wherever possible. And yeah, so this is one of the earlier stages. So the idea is that we will have the data in advance of the in-person sensory testing and the judging and testing summit. And we think that this will give us a lot of really cool information in terms of how your prototypes compare to the animal origin samples.
Hello. All right, let's talk about nutritional profile. I will just preface this by saying that it can get confusing pretty quickly. So I have an example on a following slide that we'll go over as well. I've also been trying my best to keep up with the chat window. It's pretty explosive right now, which I appreciate, but I also want you to know I'm not a great multitasker. So just appreciate your patience, and we can hold those until the Q&A period at the end. So with nutritional profile, we're looking to match the animal origin reference as much as possible. And the standard we have identified for this is a 10% deviation. So that means 10% below and 10% above what is the nutritional standard of the animal origin reference. And that's why we have this range of 90 to 110%. We will be working with a testing partner to conduct the analyses, and the analyses we're specifically looking at are listed there in the outputs. So we're looking at total fat, we're looking at protein, and this one's a bit complex because we're looking at protein not just in terms of content, so in grams, but we're also looking at protein in terms of percent daily value. And I'll get into that a little bit too later on. We'll be looking at amino acid profile, but I will note that amino acid profile is not held to the same level of like mimicry or equivalence, as in we are looking at 10% deviation for things like total fat and protein, added sugar, dietary fiber, cholesterol, and sodium. But amino acid profile, it's not that we are looking at an exact match to what is the animal origin references amino acid profile. That would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to reach for some of the team's approaches. The methodologies we're using specifically will be up to the testing partner to identify, and we are in discussions with how to approach that and which testing partners may be a good fit. And as far as material requirements, this is one of the more intensive ones. Something I want to make a note of is it's also listed here in the rules and regulations 2.0. 200 and 250 grams of cooked prototype. This does leave room for misinterpretation, so I want to emphasize that when you submit your samples to the testing partner, and of course we will be very clear on this when we get closer to that time period, but we're actually asking for 200 to 250 grams of cooked prototype, as if you have to submit as much material as you need to basically yield that amount once it's cooked. So you have to take into account your cook loss is what I want to underline. But all that said, we can move on to the next slide with some examples. The green cells are going to be the nutritional parameters that are true to all semifinalist teams, whereas the item identified in yellow, cholesterol, will only apply to semifinalist teams with a cell-based approach. These are not the exact numbers that we will be using. This is really just an example. I pulled this nutritional data from the USDA food database, and it is for cooked boneless, skinless chicken breast per 100 grams. What we will do in Q1 of next year is provide a product specification sheet for chicken and fish, and perhaps down to a specific fish species, or more ideally the fish type being oily versus white. But we will provide the numbers essentially, and we will also identify what the lower limit is as well as what the upper limit is. So looking at fat at 3.24 grams, that means that teams have some wiggle room, meaning that nutritional equivalence will be achieved according to our 10% deviation standard, as long as it's within 2.92 to 3.56 grams. We have not also identified whether or not, or at least what rounding rules we will hold true to, but it is likely that we will be leaning toward what the USDA, the US FDA holds true for their nutritional profile standards. Where it gets a little complicated is protein. So for protein, we have about 32 grams in the animal origin reference with a lower limit of about 29 grams and an upper limit of 35 grams. So that is the protein content. As many of you may know, when you look at daily value, it actually takes into account the PDCAAS score, which will be calculated using the amino acid profile that we'll be obtaining from our testing partner. But your daily value doesn't necessarily rely on a PDCAAS score of 1, as long as it's within the daily value range between 57.7, so 58%, and about 71%. And I think that covers it for nutritional profile. I'll pass it on to Cameron for environmental.
Okay, great, thanks. So as was stated earlier, in terms of assessing the environmental footprint of producing your products, this will be part of a technical submission. So the objective here is to estimate the energy, land, water, and greenhouse gas usage associated with the production of your prototypes. And the goal here is that through this exercise, you'll identify key drivers of the environmental impact that you can then target for improvement. So the input here is real world consumption data, we're going to be using an LCA compatible model. It's definitely not a full LCA, but it's sort of a pre-LCA type model. So the input will be the things that you consume to produce your product. So as an example, say you're a cell-based team, you're working in a lab, and you use a lot of small plastic consumables, things like pipette tips, microfuge tubes, that sort of thing. Then you would account for that, how many of those or what volume of that you're using, and that would be one of your entry points of consumption data. And then you would go along and include all the other things that you calculate. So we'll be building out a system, or kind of like a spreadsheet type system, where you input your consumption data, and then from that, we'll be able to determine greenhouse gas emission projections, water land use, air pollutants, things like that. And one thing I'll say is that for the environmental footprint, what we're asking is 2 data sets. So the first data set will be your actual consumption over a 6-month period, starting in January of 2022 through the end of June 2022. So that'll be the first input. So this will be exactly just what you guys are consuming in the process of producing your prototypes. In addition to that, we'll be asking teams to project consumption at a scale-up scenario. So the idea here is that if there are reasonable efficiencies that could be projected through the process of scaling to a larger facility, or you feel like your production process is uniquely one that will benefit from scale, then that will be reflected in that second data set. So more details will come as we finalize the technical submission that will be sent out to teams. But the idea is that you'll be asked to submit 2 data sets, and the first one, which is that 6-month period, because it's your real world consumption, there may be the possibility that we'll ask for verification of some consumption data. So that could be something like receipts or invoices from suppliers of those things that you're consuming. So just giving teams a heads up that you may want to keep that data handy.
Okay, so for economic evaluation, we essentially at the end of the day just want all teams to be thinking about how to commercialize their product, because a part of bringing your products to the next billion is knowing how to scale them. So we are going to be looking at not only how you produce your product, but also obtaining pricing on a per kg basis of your prototype. And then we'll be also looking at what your forecasted price may be according to a forecast that we will provide with a scope of 1 to 5 years. So assessing cost is a very difficult thing. We understand that. Our intention here is that you could use something like the cost of your ingredients on a per kg basis, and apply a standard coefficient for the various parties a part of what is the price to the consumer. So that would be the margin for a distributor, the margin for a manufacturer, and also one for the retailer. So in a spreadsheet that we will provide to teams, you would ideally enter the cost of your ingredients, and it would spit out the end cost of your product, keeping in mind the margins per party, being the manufacturer, distributor, and the retailer. And then based on a forecast, you would then be able to project your costs based on the volumes that we will provide. Something that's made clear in the rules and regulations is that we really don't want teams to have advantages over others just due to perceived volume capacity. So we are going to ask that some, like the costs initially prior to the forecast, be achieved on a minimum order quantity basis. For those who aren't familiar, in the B2B world, you can't just buy any ingredient that you want. They sell them according to minimum orders. And the minimum order quantities are typically about a pallet's worth of that product. So the weights will vary depending on the ingredient. And we just want that kind of set as a standard to level the playing field a bit. The output of this whole exercise will be an estimate of the cost of bringing your product to market at a pilot scale of operation, an estimate of what your costs will be from years 1 through year 5, again, based on the forecast that we provide. And then also a breakdown of what your costs are, perhaps identifying where there may be potential for cost reduction. And lastly, a process flow diagram to really bring the whole picture together.
Okay, so on to food safety. The goal of food safety is really to make sure that your prototypes are safe for human consumption and free of any adventitious agents that could be a concern. So we'll be asking for, as was mentioned earlier, the food safety declaration. And the goal of the food safety declaration is essentially kind of a informed consent type approach, so that the judging panel that will be eating your products at the semifinal testing event is comfortable doing so and confident that there's no risk to them. So through that process, we'll be obtaining ingredient and process information. This will all be supplied under NDA. So if there's information that you feel is proprietary, you know, it will be through or shared through an NDA. So you know, won't leave sort of the XPRIZE room. So that's the first thing. So the food safety declaration is due as part of the semifinalist verification. And based on the information provided in the food safety declaration, that will influence some of the methodology that is used to determine the safety of your products. So another thing that we'll be asking of teams, this will be just prior to the in-person testing and judging summit. So we're going to be using something called a SimPlate device. So the idea here is it's a very kind of crude, simple to use test. It's not very specific, but what it will do is allow you to make sure that your samples are below certain thresholds for bacteria and yeast and mold contamination. So it's very simple to use. The material requirements are quite modest. So those will be shipped out to each team. And then the idea is that right before you get on the plane to Abu Dhabi, you'll test one of your samples using the SimPlate testing just to confirm that that things are good to go. And then in addition, teams will be required to submit approximately half of a structured cutlet for microbiological testing on site, though we will work to reduce this size requirement. So in terms of the methodology, so the judging panel will look at the information provided on the food safety declaration form. And from that, they will determine which tests you will need to submit for. You will use the SimPlate, as I mentioned, at your own facility. And then once you arrive in Abu Dhabi, you will submit sample for testing, for microbiological testing. The idea there is to look for standard bacterial foodborne pathogens and ensure that your sample is free of those. Some teams may have to submit sample for mycotoxin and heavy metal testing. And the teams that are required to do so will be based on the information provided in the food safety declaration form. You know, I don't want to make any promises, but I anticipate that probably very few teams will need to submit for those, and we'll work with them well in advance so that they are able to meet the material requirements if they do have to submit for those tests. So the output here is we just want to confirm that first and foremost that the teams that you guys have consumed your own prototypes. So I think that's a reasonable request of all teams. If you want our judging panel to eat them, you should be confident in have eaten it yourselves. And I'm sure many of you have in the process of product development. We'll be testing to confirm your samples are free of foodborne bacterial pathogenic contamination. And through the food safety declaration, we will obtain sufficient information to assert that your prototypes are free of adventitious agents and safe for consumption. So we're not asking teams to go through any sort of formal regulatory approval process at this point, but the hope is that we will get sufficient information that our judging panel will be confident when they get to the sensory testing part of the competition. So this is just a timeline overview for the food safety. So you will test for the bacterial contamination, you'll test twice. So the first is you will test at your own facility using the SimPlate device. So this will be provided by XPRIZE, and basically it's a very simple test. You guys can look it up, but we'll provide specific protocols on how to conduct SimPlate testing closer to the date. And essentially, you'll just take a picture and submit it to us. So it's just a visual. You visualize growth using a UV lamp, and then you get a sense for how much microbial growth is occurring, which should be very low and below certain thresholds. And then on site, you'll submit a sample for microbiological testing, and that will occur kind of the first day that you arrive, and the results will be returned before the testing and judging summit, so that the judges are confident that what they're eating has been tested and confirmed to be free of pathogenic bacterial contamination.
Okay, preparation and cookability. I saw some questions earlier in the chat, and I hope to identify them now. During this step, another way to look at it is, I mean, this is going to be happening all the same day. It's like a pre-step to the other two criteria being size and sensory analysis. So during this stage, we're going to be asking teams for 5 to 7, enough product to yield 5 to 7 cooked structured cutlets or fillets. So each fillet or cutlet being between 1.5 to 2 ounces in size. We will be providing salt, pepper, and canola oil. We will determine those product specifications as well as the amounts that we provided to teams at the testing site. Teams will be able to identify how they want to prepare and cook their product. Some of the guardrails that we've established outside of the minimal ingredient additions are the heat preparation or cooking methods, which can be either pan searing and or oven roasting. So that means you can choose one or the other or a combination of the two. We will be conducting weight measurements before and after the cooking step as well, which leads to our other criteria being size. That way identifying cook loss essentially. During this stage, we're going to be looking at how your prototype behaves and its level of versatility or mimicry to the animal origin reference. We also want to make sure that the learning curve is as easy as possible for consumers who would in the future be consuming your product, that it's as it always has been for any conventional animal origin reference type meat product. And with that said, I think we can move on over to size, which I can touch upon briefly. Cameron, if I miss anything, of course, feel free to interrupt. During this, we're going to be using one of those cutlets or fillets from the previous step being prep and cookability to measure the weight of your prototype both before and after the cooking step to identify the cook loss data. And there will also be some size, dimensions, measurements of those prototypes both before and after as well. I don't think I missed anything, so I'll move on to sensory profile. To be very honest with you, we are trying our best to reduce material requirements as much as possible throughout this competition. We know it will be a very difficult ask for some teams depending on their approaches. To be very transparent with you, this is the most material intensive part of the competition, and it's because we are submitting enough samples to a judging panel to assess, being 5 to 7 members of a judging panel. And it's unlikely that the material requirements will be reduced any further than what we've asked for this criterion. So in this stage, we are going to be using both descriptive and discrimination methods. Discrimination is just another word for difference. Essentially what we're doing is we're quantifying descriptive measures or characteristics such as taste, aroma, texture, and appearance, maybe some other characteristics as well. On the difference side, we're trying to quantify the degree of mimicry or difference to the animal origin reference. So for some teams that will be chicken, and for other teams that will be fish, and maybe a specific fish species. We will also be asking our trained judging panel to assess prototypes both after it's being cooked and at some time after cooking. The reason we put that in there is really just due to my familiarity with the plant-based meat alternative space, which can sometimes rely pretty heavily on a hydrocolloid system, and those systems can often deteriorate upon cooling. So you really want to make sure in judging the degree of mimicry or difference between your prototype and the animal origin reference that it retains its integrity to the same standard that it would if it was an animal origin product. And with all that said, I think I've covered everything on this slide. We can go into Q&A.
All right, thank you, MJ and Cameron. So now it's your turn to ask us questions. So we have until 10:30 Pacific time. That's about 40 minutes of time for Q&A. I might cut us off around the 5-minute mark and close us out with a few kind of next steps. But this is your moment now to ask us any questions you have. And I know there are a lot in the chat. I haven't really been monitoring it because I've been doing the slides, but
I've compiled them all. I'm happy to go through them and, you know, call on people to clarify or chime in. Yeah. So I'm going to try to group them, but I might not do a good job because there are a lot of questions and about a lot of things. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions from Victor, who asked, one, which type of animal origin reference will we choose for chicken and fish, knowing that there's a wide range out there? I think I can take that one. NJ and Cameron, help me out if I miss anything, but the animal origin reference we are choosing is based off of the spec sheet that we will send. So the nutritional profile is kind of guiding that selection. And if anyone wants to add anything, NJ or Cameron, please chime in. Okay, no? All right. The other question from Victor was, will the prototype version that we submit in July and October be the same? Does it have to be the same prototype? I see MJ nodding. Yes.
I'm sorry, I replied to it in the chat. It does have to be the same prototype. There will just be different material requirements that are asked at different stages, but the same prototype, same version of that prototype is correct.
Great. And Jacob Yang had a question. Do we have to submit only one product, or can we submit various types, size, shape of products? I think we touched on this in the detailed presentation of the requirements. So you will be asked to submit a number of products, and I think they can be a larger size, but they shouldn't be a smaller size. And the shape, and Cameron and MJ, please chime in on this one too. I think we're looking at a certain height or dimension.
Yeah, that's right. So your product should be a minimum thickness of 1 centimeter in a cooked state. That's required for the texture profile analysis that we'll be conducting, and that requirement is going to be held consistent throughout the competition. So if you're thicker than that, that's okay, but the minimum thickness will be 1 centimeter.
All right, thank you, Cameron. I'm gonna ask either Jordan, please add questions to the file, because I'm kind of a few more ones are coming in, and I just have the ones that were shared earlier. All right, so Varun had a question. Do we have freedom to provide any specific cooking instructions, or is it up to the testing partner? I think we also answered this one. There are specific cooking instructions. When you are sending your product to a testing partner, we expect you to provide the testing partner a standard of procedure in line with the preparation and cookability criteria that we outlined. So you let the testing partner know exactly how they should handle your product, and the criteria for preparation will be the same everywhere. All right. Kimiko had a question related to this. Do you provide the name of the testing partner, or is it up to us to decide? XPRIZE will identify the testing partner, and the way it works is we will have a direct partnership with these testing partners to provide us with the tests and results. So what we will try to do is make sure they're regionally located to make it easier for you to ship your products over. But you will have one designated or a few designated testing partners to work with. And then the second question from Kimiko, I will call on Cameron to answer. She's asked, I'd love to have notes on 2 types of the data sets we need to submit for the environmental footprint.
Yeah, so I'll say that there are more details in the rules and regulations 2.0 documents in terms of what you'll be asked to provide, including some examples about the consumption data. And then beyond that, once we get the tool that you will use for data entry finalized, then one of the members of our judging panel who will be overseeing that may be able to provide a webinar type thing for detailed instructions. And if he's unable to, then one of us will certainly do that to provide sort of a walkthrough for how you should be reporting your consumption data and how to fill out the sheet so that we can use that data to determine the environmental footprint.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cameron. And then the third question from Kimiko that just came in, how many team members can I bring to Abu Dhabi? We really advise you to bring up to 3 team members. You can bring more, but we really want to limit it to up to 3 team members. We feel like this is sufficient for the requirements that we have. All right. Arun had a few questions. The size requirements for the physical component. Are there details on the number of replicates we need to submit? I feel like we answered this one. Arun, if we didn't, okay, perfect. I see you nodding. The second question, upper limit on the size. I think we answered this one too. Will larger samples be accepted? I believe yes. If you want to submit a larger sample, that's fine. That way you have some extra if something goes wrong too. So totally fine. And then the third question, again to Cameron, I believe, on the environmental inputs. Arun is asking, the environmental inputs involve some of our process details, some things that are trade secrets or confidential. How do we incorporate them?
Yeah, so that's certainly something that we're sympathetic to. So everything will be provided under NDA, so it won't be shared outside of XPRIZE. And the idea there is that the tool that will be used to calculate it should be fairly automated. So once that tool is developed, you guys will input your data. So the number of humans that need to actually look at the specifics of the data will be very limited, and that data will not be shared beyond it being used to calculate the environmental footprint of your sample. In terms of the resolution of the data that you need to provide, I used that example before of pipette tips and microfiche tubes. I don't think you need that level of resolution, to my understanding. I think it's more like you would categorize those together as plastic consumables. So it may be possible that if there are specific details of your process that are particularly sensitive, you may be able to just kind of go one step to a kind of lower resolution. So if it's something very specific, maybe you can go up so that instead of specifying exactly what it is, say it's like a particular chemical, you could just put generally as inorganic compounds or something like that. So then you're not providing a very specific, highly sensitive piece of information. I would also just add that as we get closer to the time when you actually need to submit that data, if there is something that you are particularly concerned about, then you can always reach out to us, and I'm sure that we'll come up with a creative solution so that we can still obtain a meaningful assessment of the environmental footprint without you feeling like you're compromising the integrity or the security of your process or ingredient composition.
Thanks, Cameron. And Kathleen also had a follow-up question about this question of confidentiality. I think it was around. Feel free to unmute too, Kathleen, to ask your question. But yeah, site visits and
Yeah.
In terms of site visits, I mean, my thinking as of now is that those probably would not be required, at least not for the environmental aspect side of things. When I say like verifiable consumption data, it's more like, if you're saying that you're using, I don't know, like say like 20 kilograms of plastic consumables, then you bought 20 kilograms of plastic consumables, maybe you can provide us with like receipts or invoices from suppliers of those consumables, and we can kind of verify that information that way. That being said, if something does pop up, we maybe won't rule it out entirely, but I don't think that would be a part of the verification process.
And to some extent, the specifics of the composition could, in theory, be held as trade secrets, and we just need to be really sure that your sort of scheme for maintaining confidentiality is robust, because this could have fairly serious, obviously, repercussions for the future of companies if the information is shared.
yeah, and this is something we're very sensitive to across the board. I don't know, Jordan, if you want to talk about data, what we will use, how we'll use it, what we'll share back with teams, because a lot of you're submitting your products to be tested maybe for the first time on certain criteria. So that's also data that we're generating that we'd like to share with you. So maybe Jordan can talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So it's a great question. For data, anything that you submit to us, the competition, the judging panel, all of that is confidential. It won't be released to anyone outside of the judging panel. It's just for them to review secretly, of course, and it will remain confidential. Test results that get generated from like the testing partners and laboratories that you'll be shipping your products and prototypes to, those results may be used in, like for research purposes that we might use down the line, but that's just, the kind of the output data that will be anonymized in that case. So there's really kind of two different data types you can think of. There's all the data and information that you submit in your application, and then in the upcoming technical submission, that's all private, confidential, won't ever be released. Results that get generated from the testing process, the competition process, some of that information may be released, but if it ever does, you will know from us way ahead of time. You'll get our permission, and it will be anonymized. So we take that very seriously, as Caroline said, and you can rest assured that anyone that views your data, the judging panel, they're all covered by confidentiality and non-disclosure clauses and provisions in their judging agreements, and that's all laid out in the competitor agreement as well, that you all have hopefully read through with your legal teams. And if you have any questions on that, shoot us an email, but I hope that clears it up for you.
Okay. Yeah, I am the legal team, so
Okay.
I'll be following up with you.
Okay. I'll be hearing from the lawyer, it looks like. Cool.
All right, Shavankar, please go ahead.
So yeah, I just had a quick question about the semi-finalist verification. So it says in that thing that you need to create a video which has a meter rule next to it. So is there a criteria that we need to meet in terms of size? That's like an instant qualifier or disqualifier? Like, is there like a criteria there? Yeah.
So yeah, short answer is yes. We want at that point to just make sure that you're on track, at least with one prototype, that you are on track to meet that size requirement. Of course, we'll look at these results and reach out to teams if we see that maybe a team is a little bit behind, to understand why, etc. But the verification round, it's not like a testing round, it's more of a checkpoint, and then we see what comes out of it. But yeah, the size should be almost there at that point, if not 100% there.
So it's like calculated by density of the animal reference. that right? Like because we're just using a meter rule, right, which is not a measure of mass, and then the criteria is mass.
Yeah, so at that point, again, it's not the criteria. It's just, is there a physical prototype that will come to the testing site? Does that exist? And how, like just the shape, is it meeting some of the kind of dimensions, the thickness that Cameron mentioned? And also Cameron and MJ, if you have clarifications here, please chime in, but it's not a mass test, no.
Yeah, no, it's just like I would encourage teams to meet that 1 centimeter thickness parameter. You know, the idea here is that if the product is too thin and you cut through it, we're not going to be able to get any sense for how that actual structured prototype is behaving. So that's kind of the main parameter. In terms of like overall size, you don't need to adhere to the 1.5 to 2 ounces at this point. You know, if it's a smaller product, just so long as it's large enough that the video can show off its performance as it's cut through. That's what this is intending to look into.
Thanks.
And I think one quick thing just to reinforce is that the demo video that XPRIZE is planning to produce, the idea is that you'll have that in advance. So then once you get that kind of example, then you'll probably have a better idea of what we're looking for, and then any further questions can be more pointed and specific based on the example video that will be provided.
And I think, Paul, you had a similar question to on the size. Is the 1 centimeter dimension minimum pre-cooked or after cooking? Is that the question?
Yeah, it should be after cooking, and the reason for that is for the texture profile analysis. The samples are 1 centimeter cubed, so we're going to be doing it on cooked and uncooked. So they'll be cut to size for the uncooked state, and for the cooked state, they'll be cut to size as well. But for that to occur, that they have to meet that minimum thickness of 1 centimeter. So that's kind of the texture profile analysis is where we're rooting this 1 centimeter thickness requirement, because that'll be required to facilitate data collection using that methodology.
Right. I'll go to Ben Friedman next. He asked a couple of questions. One I'll save for later because it's asking about the judging criteria, and there are a few other questions on that. His second question is the rules and regulations document mentions protein quality. Is there any further guidance here? Also, will there be any guidance on fat quality? I think that one goes to MJ.
Yep, I'll take that one on. So with the fatty acid profile, we are not looking into those specifics. I hope that answers the question pertaining to fat. Pertaining to protein quality, I'm not quite sure where to start, because if you want guidance, I feel like that's a very specific type of question that we're happy to answer. But essentially for protein quality, how we're approaching that assessment without necessarily having to do PDCAST, because that will require more material and also a pretty high cost. We can look at amino acid profile, and we could use the FAO and the World Health Organization's recommended calculations to essentially identify what your plant protein or plant protein blends PDCAST calculated would be. From there, you would multiply that PDCAST score by your protein content, and that number would identify the amount of complete protein that you have in your product. And that complete protein is what's used to create your % daily value. So according to US FDA regulations, that's 50 grams for adults per day. And you would take your complete protein value divided by 50, and that would yield your % daily value. I hope that answered the question, but I encourage you to please pick it apart or elaborate in any way.
How will those results be reported?
I'm sorry, Kathleen, you cut out a little bit. How are those results being reported?
Yeah, so first of all, are you just sort of giving, so I have a question in the chat. are they publicly reported, down to the granularity of, so I think you answered this question, that granularity with respect to like specific amino acids, all of that stuff is not going to be tested. Overall, it'll be just sort of, fat, protein, et cetera. But will you be reporting those, making those percentages public? With respect to the specific percentages, will you just sort of report meets or exceeds, or is that totally within the XPRIZE? Yeah.
Yeah, I saw your question, Kathleen, in the chat. I copied it over into my notes and I started it because it's a lengthy explanation and I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. So I will definitely follow up more thoroughly on it. But in the meantime, as far as public, the eyes that would see these results would be the testing partner conducting the assessments and potentially the judging panel. With things like nutritional profile, it really doesn't leave room for a qualitative response from our judges. It's more of a black or white answer. So it will be seen by the 4 members of our tech ops team. And the specifics, what will be seen is hopefully our testing partner can do the calculations based on the amino acid profile that they would conduct. And at that point, we would receive something like a pristine nutrition facts label that would just identify what your % daily value is in addition to your protein content.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, Kathleen, we don't have any concrete plans yet for what would be, released publicly, if you will. So everything MJ has said is accurate. That will be seen by the judging panel, of course, for scoring purposes. But anything that will be released outside of the judging panel, there are no concrete plans yet. Like I mentioned, we will communicate that to you and the rest of the teams way ahead of time, so you're aware of what will be published and won't be. And again, it will all be anonymized if that were to be released.
Okay, well, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, there were a couple of questions from Greg about their specific production of bluefin tuna. So one around the preparation and cookability criteria, and one about the nutritional profile and the AO reference. Nutrition and structure and the AO reference. Greg, do you mind coming online and unmuting and asking your questions? Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Hello, everybody.
Hey.
I think Justin actually submitted a similar question in the chat just recently about the differences between species of the fish. There's such wide variability, farmed versus wild, in terms of fat and protein and nutrition and performance, and even cuts of the fish, like the top of the bluefin tuna. It's very different than the belly of the bluefin tuna. So how is XPRIZE going to address that challenge in determining the AO reference?
I'm happy to start. Yeah, we acknowledge that it's a very complicated process, and I wish I had a more precise answer for you at this time. These are conversations we're actively exploring with prize partners who will be able to provide some guidance. They are within the food industry. They do work with meat products across a variety of different animal types. So we are trying our best to kind of take all these considerations into play and then create a value that isn't too restrictive, that won't be almost impossible to reach. I want to say that we welcome your feedback and like any thoughts or concerns you may have prior to and even after the release of the product specification sheets. Right now, we're of the mindset when it comes to fish that we will do a white fish type versus an oily fish type. And what that may look like, I'm not saying this is for sure, is these are just all the things we've been considering and talking about in the past, is maybe we would take a look at the top performing white fish, depending on a specific geographic region of the world and of a certain type, whether they're conventionally farmed or whether they're wild. And we would do an average. Part of the reason why this is still an ongoing conversation is because access to that information is pretty limited, and why we need a testing partner, or not testing, a prize partner in the first place to get this information, unless we want to do the raw data ourselves. So it could be like an average of the top performing white fish and the top performing oily fish. perhaps we allow more deviations to occur for fish teams. Not saying that will happen, but it's just all these things are actively in conversation.
Yeah.
I would also just add there that because teams don't have to finalize their species selection yet, it makes it difficult to release species-specific product specification sheets. Once the species selection is locked in, if your species that you're trying to mimic, deviates significantly from the generalized spec sheet, then communicate that to us, and we can provide a species, or endeavor to provide a species-specific spec sheet. But one thing I will say is that, like, for the comparison on the structure and physical characteristics, it will be matched species to species. So if you're doing bluefin tuna, then we'll make sure that a piece of bluefin tuna is what's being tested for texture profile analysis and that sort of thing. So you're not going to be compared. I know there was something in the chat about comparing like salmon to mackerel or herring, and yeah, that would not be an informative comparison for the purposes of the competition. So it will be species to species match for the lab testing. The reason why we've just held back thus far is because teams still have the option to change their selection. So until everyone has their selection locked in and we know the full scope of what we need to test, we're a little limited in terms of what we can provide in advance of that.
Thank you, MJ and Cameron. I really hope that does clarify that question. We've thought about it at length, as you can see. And Ben's question, which I think Cameron touched on, who's posing as Justin, one of the Justin callbacks on the call. Excuse me, there's some background. I'm sorry, can someone take over for me? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll happily take over. I'm not quite sure where Caroline was going to lead off on, but I just wanted to make note that with all the comments from Justin Colback, the many Justin Colbacks out there, I am making note of them because they are going to be very crucial as we explore product specification sheets. That doesn't really give you any definitive information other than we're acknowledging it right now and making note of it to follow up. I don't know if Caroline's background noise is still persisting. If it is, if you want to type in the chat window where I should go next, feel free to.
Sorry. Yes, my building just decided to do a fire safety test, so they'll be blasting some announcements.
This happened to me. This happened to me too. Not that long ago.
I am so sorry. I think the other questions on here have been answered by MJ in the chat, I believe. So I can't see. Oh, there's some more on the bottom here. One from Yuko for the TPA of 1 centimeter cube, uncooked and cooked samples. Are there any specific probe to be used? How are they compared to the data of AO? Example, breaded preparation versus bare.
Yeah, so the idea for TPA is that there won't be any sort of like breading or anything like that. The preparation instructions should adhere to what's outlined in the rules and regulations for preparation and cookability. So you're just essentially cooking your prototype on its own. And the animal origin sample will be prepared in the same way. So it will be, if you're, say, for a chicken team, it'll be a boneless, skinless chicken breast that adheres to the parameters outlined in the product specification sheet that will be provided. And it will be cooked according to those parameters. And then after the cooking is completed for TPA, the temperature is typically allowed to cool to somewhere between 30 and 22 degrees. And then that's where the cooked TPA readings are taken. So that's hopefully answers that question and provides some more clarity. If not, please feel free to follow up.
Okay, I think we covered all the questions. Yeah, now it's time. I saw a finger come up. So
the other part of
go ahead.
The other part of that question was, do you know what kind of probe you're going to use? Will it be a full cut? Will it be a 1 centimeter? You might not know right now. I don't know.
Yeah, so it will depend on the actual testing partner and what they have, but another name for this is like a double compression test. So it doesn't actually cut, it just compresses twice. And I don't know how much, off the top of my head, how much variability there are in terms of instrumentation for TPA. My understanding is it's relatively standard. So it's not like a Warner Bratzler where they're actually cutting through and the type of blade changes. So I don't think that it's a pretty standard test to the best of my knowledge, but once the testing partner has been identified, that information will be released, and then we can provide the specifics on the instrument that will be conducting and collecting the TPA data.
Yep, go ahead, Victor.
Hi guys, I think I have two questions. One of them maybe we have discussed in previous sessions, but I can't quite recall. Regarding the percentage of animal cells in the finished product for cell-based meat products, do you guys have any minimum in your sort of requirements? And the second one is on the food safety declaration. So the food safety declaration on itself could be a 2-year project, right? Especially as when it declares for safety of the media components that are used, not only on composition, but concentrations. So I wonder how you guys are going to take that into account and which type of information will you actually have to look into.
In terms of the food safety declaration, it's answering specific questions. So there's a set of questions, like, I don't remember off the top of my head, I think it's about 10 questions that need to be provided. It does ask for a fair bit of information, but I do think that it's a reasonable amount of time given what we're asking. Again, we're not asking for any sort of formal regulatory approval. It's more just to provide the judges the information so they can make an assessment whether or not they're comfortable consuming the products based on the information provided. And I'm sorry, I missed part of your other question. So I think you were asking how much, or like what proponent, the amount of cells required to be considered cell-based. Is that right? Was that the question?
Yeah, if you guys are establishing sort of a minimum.
Yeah, so there's no minimum, but if you do incorporate animal cells, then you're considered either a cell-based, or so if you're like a blended approach, you're still considered a cell-based team. So there is no strict minimum for how many, or what percentage of your product has to be animal cells. But if there are any animal cells, then you're categorized as a cell-based team.
Got it. Thank you.
And just a quick add on the food safety declaration. It's already live, so we did release it with the rules and regulations because we know it takes some time to complete. So take a look at it now. You still have until March to submit it, but it's there now if you want to take a look and assess how much work that would be. All right, we have another 5 minutes, as I can see in the chat. Any other questions that weren't answered or have come up in the last couple of minutes? I'll take that opportunity to say this is not the only opportunity for you guys to ask questions. We're on email, we're on the Slack. Just drop us an email anytime and we're happy to follow up. We're here for you. So, Greg, I love the hat, by the way, I just noticed. Right. Any last remarks from MJ and Cameron on things, since we don't have questions coming up? Anything you want to leave the teams with? Oh,
sorry, one question. Yeah, just logistics. I put it in the chat. If there is there a plan B if there is a COVID or travel ban just before the semi-final testing, given that it's just happened
yes,
in our country?
Right, Jordan maybe can take that one. He's always also considering this and bringing it up for us. So,
yeah, it's a great question, Paul. So we're going to be monitoring COVID, of course, and when we release that testing operations guide that Caroline mentioned earlier in the presentation, that'll be a very exhaustive document. We're going to have a section there about COVID protocols and kind of a contingency plan around what happens if, there's like the Omicron Omega variant and nobody can travel. So we're going to think that through and have some details on that in that document. And wherever we do host the testing site, if we are in person, we'll follow all the, regional and national regulations and, the WHO health guidelines on COVID protocols. So rest assured, we're considering that right now. Awesome.
Jordan, do you want to close us out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me pull up the slide deck again. Okay, so. Okay, just in closing here, want to mention a few upcoming things we have planned for you. So we have a lot of activities scheduled. That's what we're working on in addition to the rules and regulations, testing stuff, of course. So what you can expect to hear from us very soon here, we're going to release a document with dates and details on these events, but we're planning webinars and workshops with different industry stakeholders, some of our partners, maybe our sponsors. So more to come on that. We're hoping to host some meetups too. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be attending some in-person events, hopefully in different cities around the world. And we hope that if you're in the area, you can join us at the events and then maybe, you know, meet up at a restaurant or a bar or something and just hang out and get to know each other more. So we're hoping to do that. We'll try to plan the logistics to where it makes sense for you and where you're living, but more to come on that. We also are very excited to host what we're calling an investor coaching series. We're going to be hosting this in partnership with the District 3 Innovation Center. So they have a great program where it's like a multi-day program training entrepreneurs like yourselves on how to pitch to investors if that's all of interest to you. So we sent that survey out previously. There seemed to be a vast majority of you interested in some sort of training like this. So that will be taking place early in 2022. Again, we'll send out the details on that. You'll have to submit like a brief video submission that D3 will review, and they'll kind of put you into a cohort based on your experience with pitching, essentially. So that's how it will work. And then lastly, we're hoping to host some sort of what we're calling a vendor showcase. And what that means basically is we're hoping to bring together a lot of different vendors and suppliers and service providers in the alternative protein industry. So for cell-based, plant-based, and fermentation across the board, bring them together in like a virtual webinar like this and have them present to you their offerings, what they can do for you, the services they can provide. And then you can connect with them from there and work with them directly if you want to contract them for your process improvements, or if you want to use them for like ingredients sourcing, any sort of thing like that. We're hoping to bring together a collection of different vendors that will be exclusive to you, the XPRIZE teams. It won't be open to the public at all. But on that note, we're just wondering if this is at all of interest to you. If it's not, then we don't have to host it. But if it is, if a lot of you are very interested, then we will host it. So to that end, I'd like to ask you to take a very quick poll in the Slack channel, and I'll drop it here right now. But you just have to indicate, yes, you're interested, no, you're not, or maybe you're interested. And this will be hosted, we're planning for late February or early March, sometime around then. Again, if there's a vast majority of interest, we will host it. So I'm going to drop the poll now, and it'd be great if you could take it. And then other than that, this is all we have planned. If you have any questions whatsoever, you have our emails, please reach out. We're here to help you and answer your questions. But that's all. You will receive a recording of this webinar and a copy of the slide presentation that we showed today.